This is my fault. I asked what kind of content would you like to see, and someone said that I should make a list with the scenes in books I think about daily. And I do have a few. Are you ready? Let's talk fantasy. Now, I'm gonna start by the book that consolidated my love for fantasy, and it's Half the Wall by Joe Abercrombie. I think at this point everyone's aware of my love for Abercrombie's work, but what people normally don't know is that I started reading Abercrombie with the Shattered Sea trilogy. This is book 2 in the series, and this is a Viking-inspired high fantasy. In this scene, the main characters are traveling on a ship, and the Viking ships were not especially big. So because they needed to cut short because they were on a close timeline, instead of going across the sea, they decided to carry the ship across a mountain. The part of going up the mountain was hard but doable, but the part of going down the mountain was even harder because they had to keep the ship from just set loose and running across the mountain. There were people in charge of putting some wood in front of the ship so the ship was not scratching the floor with rocks and whatnot. And it gets to that moment when some of the ropes snap and they lose control of the ship. Again, there were people in front of the ship. And there's this character who is supposed to be like really strong but still a human. And he gets a rope across a tree and was pulling hard from it. So just imagine the character was pulling from a rope and there's a tree. So the ship is falling here, the character is here pulling from the rope, and of course he cannot avoid the ship from going down, but it gives 1 second that is crucial to save someone's life. I was in pure tension. When I finished the chapter, I was shaking, and I remember finishing the book and thinking, this is going to be my personality for the rest of my life. Another scene from a book that I think about fairly often is from Mirror Heavens by Rebecca Ronhorst. This is book 3 in the Between Earth and Sky series. I'm of the opinion that a book doesn't need to be good to give you a scene or a moment that you are going to remember forever. And this is what happened with Mirror Heavens. I absolutely love book 1. Book 3 was a really disappointment for me and still hurts me because I wanted to love this series so much. There were so many things that I love about this series. The characters, the kind of magic system based on ghosts, the world building. There's a lot I enjoy, but book 3 was not it. But there's a scene. One of the characters I absolutely love is Shiala. Shiala is some kind of mermaid. And Shiala in this scene is following a ship, but the ship is kind of like getting away from her. And of course the ship is full of warriors and such. And Shiala does something when she's kind of like giving up. She sinks herself to the bottom of the ocean and she wakes up a kraken. She goes to the bottom and she sings. She has this kind of voice that can, let's say, make people do whatever she wants. Is either that or kill themselves. There are two options. And she goes to the bottom of the ocean and she sinks. And the image of the bottom of the ocean entirely dark and yet the tentacles moving around her, and then you see the kraken going up and taking the ship, destroy it in such a way. I remember that the scene incredibly vivid for whatever reason. It's just there in my head. It's an incredible scene. A book I don't talk about nearly enough is Gallant by Vicky Suave. And first of all, this edition is astonishing because it has paintings and poems and letters that are really important for the story, and yet it gives such a good touch. There's like a mansion and a family who is in charge of guarding a door in a wall. I know this sounds weird, but this wall is in the garden and the door is like a breaking point between our world and the afterlife. Of course, in the afterlife, there's death. And at some point in the story, our main character has to go through that door to the afterlife to get someone back or something back. I don't remember. And I remember the introduction of death because it's a character that was like sitting on a throne and was using his own bones to make kind of like bodies fight each other. So he kind of can create bodies using his own bones or shards of his bones. And he was just bored there drinking something, seeing some people fight. And at the moment that he notices that there's someone in the afterlife, he gets really excited. And I don't know why, but I thought that that was something that a character such as Death would do. Someone that is immortal being, living forever and entirely bored. So something that is new would really excite him. And for some reason I remember that like the best representation I've ever read of death, and I loved it. Of course, we cannot speak of death without speaking of The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. Now, this also has one of the greatest representations of death as a character, and the first time that he appears, oh my god, the laugh. Sometimes I think about this scene and I just started laughing out of nowhere. So in this scene, there's a tavern, and the owner of the tavern just got an insurance for the tavern, and there's a brawl, and I think some bandits and some warriors start fighting, and the owner of the tavern goes down to the basement and start preparing everything to set it on fire, because he was promised money if something happened, so he wants that money to just get away. And and he's like on the stairs already ready to get out. He's like, where are the fucking matches? Like, this cat is always playing with the matches. And a hand appears. He's like, here, take it. He takes, oh, thank you. He turns around, he sees Death, and the owner is like, oh no. And Death is like, oh yes. It's so simple yet so incredibly funny. I remember reading it and I was laughing. I had to put the book down crying. And sometimes I think about this scene, and Death as a character, even his own arc, is so incredibly funny. Like, I love Terry Pratchett because of these things. And that moment, that first introduction to Death, 5 stars, 10 stars, 15, whatever. Every time that we have a character that has an incredible power and they are learning how to use it, we rarely see the effects of these characters losing control of that power. And when they lose it, it's like just, oh, I burned a tree, I'm sorry. But sometimes those effects can be something bigger and something way more permanent. So I was reading La Guerra de los Cielos by Fernando Trujillo Sanz. I'm sorry for the non-Spanish speakers. Now, this book, there's one character that has a power that keeps getting out of control and making big things. He keeps dragging tragedy after tragedy and he's afraid. But he has this power that he can heal people and at the same time kind of like can heat up things. So there's this scene in which this character and a young kid, like a 5-6 year old girl, fall on in the river, and the river is cold as hell. So when they get out, the girl cannot breathe. I think she feels unconscious, and the guy is trying to like bring her back to life. So she starts giving her warmth just to to like the side effects of the river and that. And he cannot make it stop, and she gets getting warmer and warmer, and he cannot make it stop. I'm not sure if I can even say this, but just the heat doesn't stop, keeps increasing without stopping, ends up in a crisp. And that's a trauma that follows this character throughout the whole series, and I absolutely love it. Not because of how brutal it is, but because you see the effects of something as heavy as a supernatural power in someone that cannot control it and is afraid of the side effects of that power, and he kind of like tries to avoid using the power. I don't know, I absolutely love that scene. Like, sometimes it pops in my head like, damn, that was dark, but at the same time really realistic. This is The People in the Trees by Hanya Yanagihara. Now, this is the same author of A Little Life. That should tell you something. At the beginning of the book, you meet this character. He's sent to prison accused of pedophilia. Now, this is tough. This is tough. And there's this other character who is a really close friend of this guy, and they are in touch through letters. So this guy who is outside of jail, the friend, says that his friend has been wrongly accused, and he's going to use the letters to write a biography of this character. He says at the beginning of the story that there are some things that he left out because they might be misunderstood. Throughout the story, there are some really hard things, and it keeps you thinking of, if this is so hard, what did he left out? He left out something, or is this really the truth? You are thinking all the time about the things that might have been left out. There's one thing that is left out. There's only one thing, but you never know until you get to the end. Fucking hell, when I read it. That haunts me. That haunts me. That scene, the way that is narrated, the way that the character is talking about it, and everything that is going around, when you get to that part and you think, oh, so everything else was not hidden under a wall, like they were all true except from this part, because the guy is a psychopath. The way that he's talking about women, or the way that he's talking, he's a scientist, and they go to an island where people live longer by doing some things, and they have some rituals that are tough, that are fucking tough to read. And the way that he's talking about these things and you are thinking, did he leave something out of it? And when you get to the part that he left out, Jesus, it's so hard. It's so hard to read. It's a book I will not recommend to people because it's not for everyone. But holy shit, that scene, like it's tough, but at the same time majestic. It's such a masterpiece the way that the author is making you guess all the time about which parts are so tough that cannot be described when you are reading other parts that are like incredibly tough and they are described. I absolutely loved it. I hated it and I loved it. Another example of a book I didn't particularly like, but it has some really good things, is The Sword of Kaigen by Emma Wong. Now, I know this is a controversy, everyone loves this book, it's not me, but this book does have a great magic system. And it's not just the fact that, because you can have a magic system, a good magic system, but it's the way that you explode that magic system, it's the things that you can do and the things that you do with the magic system. There's a moment throughout the invasion in which you have to face a small amount of people to a larger amount of people, and the way that each of both sides are using their magic system. There's one part in which the enemy is making a tornado using the power of several groups, of a group of several people, and I really think of that quite often because like, damn, that was a really good use of a magic system. It's something that, even though it's a kind of magic that you see quite often because it's elemental magic, you see in anime, you see in movies, you see quite often, I never thought of that. Not in that way. And I was blown away just by the originality of it. Speaking of magic system, there's The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. In this story, we follow the main character who is supposed to be part of the lower caste, and he's supposed to be shorter, weaker than the nobles, and still the way that he fights the rage. There's one moment that he has to face one of the enemies. Now, in this magic system, there's a possibility of someone kind of like enraging a warrior, which makes them bigger, stronger, and way more resilient to attacks. This means that you can be cut, and unless that the blade is really tough, if you are getting the energy from this other person, the cut might just be a scratch. So imagine this character who is supposed to be shorter than everyone else, who is supposed to be from the lower caste, fighting this warrior that by itself is big, but being enraged is even bigger, stronger than that. And our main character is giving them hell, is giving them all the fire that they have. And the warrior who is enraged ends up running away because he's worried that he's going to die. Now, my man was fighting for his life, was fighting to kill, and that scene sometimes I pop in my head like, yeah, I can face the day, because if Tau could do that, I can face a morning. At the moment I'm finishing the Empire of the World series by Richard Swan. This might be because it's very recent, but the eldritch horrors in this story. There's necromancer magic, and there's a moment in this first book where they kind of like bring someone back alive. Well, not back alive, they bring him from the death, but someone takes his body. Like, not the person who was dead, but some entity called the Trickster. I remember reading the story and thinking, this might give me nightmares. I'm loving it all the way. I'm seeing that this is not going to be a cozy story where everything is happy endings. No, it's definitely not going to be that. But at some point, I keep seeing in the back of my eyelid, like, just those eldritch creatures that keep being described in such a horrific way. And I even think about this when I'm like barely awake or about to go to sleep. And even more from the moment that I realize that there's something in this story called the City of Sleep, which is where you go when you sleep. And in this City of Sleep, there can be eldritch creatures, eldritch horrors. At the same time that you are sleeping, they can just be walking around. And now I don't know if I'm having nightmares or I'm just visualizing this, or this might be even real. I don't know. But I think this is going to stay with me for a while. And the last one is not a scene, but it's something that happens in Piranesi. Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Now, this is a really good book. It's a hell of a book. But there's a way in which Piranesi describes the entries of the diary. So he says, day 23 from the day that the albatross entered in this room or whatever, something like that. I don't remember exactly how. But that just stuck with me. Now, when something happens at work or when something happens in my life, I'm like, day 3 from the moment that last week, from the moment that the bird entered in the warehouse and I have to like push it out through the door. And now I just make that gig to myself. It's like day 4 from the day that I like shave or something like that. It got stuck with me, so I cannot avoid it. Now it's just like I'm doing little entries in my mental diary from the moment that I read Piranesi. Not because of something that happened on the book, but just the funny way that he was just creating his own calendar based on things that happened. It was so unique. I absolutely loved it. And now is your moment to tell me about one scene that you think about daily.